I'm Andrew Radosevich, Global Market Specialist for CMB Regional Centers. I will be your host for today's event. On behalf of CMB Regional Centers, a warm welcome to all of you, and we are thrilled that so many of you are able to join us today. It is truly our pleasure to have you here today. We are delighted to present EB-5, exempt from the existing ban, and your path to permanent residency. We hope you find tremendous value in our discussions of the topics we are covering today. We have invited our distinguished guests to assist in conversations about the current environment in EB-5. Our special guest today is Mr. Mark I. Davies. Mr. Davies is dual qualified in the United States and the United Kingdom. He is the global managing partner and founder of Davies and Associates and chairs the firm's investor visa team, which focuses on EB-5, L1, E2, EB-1C, citizenship by investment, and other business and investor visa solutions. A former general counsel, Mark is relied on as primary counsel to corporations, investors, nonprofits, and businesses of all sizes. Next from CMB Regional Centers is Mr. Matt Hogan, Vice President of Project Development for CMB. Matt oversees our team that is responsible for the identification, due diligence, and underwriting of the projects receiving loans from each of CMB's EB-5 partnerships. Matt and his team are instrumental in the maturation of CMB's project offerings. We've been lucky to have him as part of our company since 2011. So today, we will start out with Mark providing a brief overview of EB-5. Then Matt and Mark will discuss a few topics about the current environment of EB-5, which will be followed by Matt's presentation on CMB Regional Centers' newest offering, Group 78, Hillwood, California, Build to Suit. Mark will provide a brief presentation on his firm's services and how that relates to EB-5. Lastly, we'll look forward to an interactive Q&A following the presentations. Some of you have already sent in questions ahead of our event today. We will start with those questions first, but we encourage you to please ask in the Q&A section located in the command or control panel at the bottom of your screens. One last reminder, your audio will be muted for the entirety of today's event. So without further ado, Mr. Mark Davies.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening here in Vietnam as appropriate. It's my pleasure to speak to people a little bit more about EB-5 in the current environment. Our firm has been very present in the Indian market for about a decade now. And I would say that after having seen a quieter Indian market, we're now definitely seeing the market pick up in terms of interest in EB-5. We also see here in Vietnam, we're also seeing sort of some similar trends. So without further ado, let's get in and to look at why that might be happening. So why still choose the USA? USA is still the largest consumer economy in the world. Clients all over the world want to access the US economy. Students want to go to US universities. To my mind, if you want to be a business person, the United States is the single country where you want to be. I was born in the United Kingdom. I see my country mates want to move from the United Kingdom to the United States. I see clients of ours who have moved to Australia, to Canada, want to move to the United States. The reason is always the same, because of the business opportunities that exist in the United States. Democracy. The United States is not about one president. In fact, the president is unable to strike down certain of the investor visa categories, most likely because of constitutional protections. The United States president will be unable to maintain a permanent ban on certain types of visas. The United States is a democracy, and as a democracy, our citizens always have the right to have their day in court and to air their views. Supporting a downtown economy. We have clients from all over the world who have businesses in the United States. During the downturn economy, the United States federal government has stepped in and supported those businesses regardless of where their owners may be in the world. Those businesses have received money to support them thrive and succeed in the COVID-19 period. Overview of the EB-5 program. As I'm sure everybody's aware, the investment amounts last year were increased to a general investment amount of $1.8 million US, which is reduced to $900,000 if the project is in a target economic area. The requirement to create 10 jobs is unchanged. The requirement to invest in a new commercial enterprise is unchanged. Program overview, regional centers. Right now, there are, if you log on the government's website, there are well in excess of 800 regional centers. Our law firm has experience in looking at these regional centers, understanding their track history and who they are. Proper due diligence is key to success. Here in Vietnam, we're hearing every day of, unfortunately, investors who have invested and are having difficulties with their investments. We read the newspapers and hear about it. With proper due diligence, these problems can easily be avoided. These problems fit into two categories: problems with receiving a green card, which are generally less problematic, and problems with protecting an investor's capital. You can protect your capital. Proper due diligence on a regional center project will reveal problems and risks. Your immigration lawyer is probably unable to help you. You may need to speak to a different kind of lawyer who specializes in real estate investment projects. You will find that there are projects in the market where the risk profile is low. There are regional centers who have been around for 20 years who have had no denials that are project related, where no investor has ever lost their money. CMB is one of those very few regional centers. As a law firm, we help our clients do both. We help our clients look at, am I going to get my green card? And we help our clients look at what are the legal protections to their capital. I always talk about the 4 C's of looking at a regional center. One is compliance. That's, are the regional center doing what they should be doing according to the law? Competency. That stretches way beyond just being a regional center and having a license. A regional center is really acting as an asset manager in a specialized type of real estate investment. You need to ask, are they experienced and qualified to do that? 80% of the regional centers in the market are not. If you invest with a regional center that has no experience in real estate asset management, it's a recipe for disaster. Conflicts of interest. The recent trends in the market have illustrated one thing. Regional center developers have conflicts of interest. As soon as a project becomes distressed, there is an irreconcilable conflict of interest between the developer and the regional center. Be careful that your regional center is truly independent and able to represent you as an investor. The last C, in some ways, is the most important C, and it's the very difficult one to tell. The last C is for cares. I suggest you work with a regional center who cares about their investors. The only way to see this is by tracking regional center performance over many years. An experienced immigration lawyer can guide you on this. An experienced immigration lawyer who has more than 10 years experience in EB-5 is going to be able to tell you how regional centers perform perhaps in a challenged case and how they care and take care of their clients. One of the keys to success in EB-5 is source of funds. This is an area where we've seen real problems. My firm has been in India for 10 years. 10 years ago, we were laughed at by other law firms for suggesting that clients need to be careful of violating Indian money transfer regulations. Now, the US consulate in Mumbai has decided they agree with our law firm and is refusing cases, refusing to issue visas where clients have not complied with Indian money transfer regulations. That means that law firms who advise their clients that the US government didn't care about foreign regulations were wrong. Their clients have denied cases. This is completely unnecessary with full due diligence. Here in Vietnam, we're seeing a similar thing. We're seeing cases where no care and due diligence was taken with proper source of funds, and especially with local compliance issues. Denials or refusals in this context are completely unnecessary. Our law firm for regional center cases maintains, amongst other law firms I should add, maintains 100% success rate. There's no reason for any case to be refused for source of funds other than sloppy lawyering. So where can your money come from for source of funds? There's a list here: property sales, investments, salaries, dividends, commercial sales, gifts. The range of options is very wide. Just be careful of local law and currency transfer issues. A skilled lawyer will be able to advise you on that and be able to assist you to avoid those pitfalls. Processing times. Outside of Chinese and Vietnamese cases, we've recently seen a huge improvement in I-526 processing times. This is because USCIS has effectively placed Chinese I-526 adjudications on freeze, and the time for those Chinese adjudication processes has been transferred to other clients, other countries. Even Vietnam is current on what we call State Department Table B. If you'd like to know the difference between State Department Table A and Table B, please ask a question. It's an important question. India is no longer in retrogression. We can talk about that and what the long-term prognosis is and why that might mean you want to file an EB-5 immediately if you're an Indian client. But the fact is, according to the US State Department's monthly bulletin, India is no longer in EB-5 retrogression. EB-5 visas are available. EB-5 visas are often, increasingly, the only way to the United States. There is no presidential block on investment visas. Investment visas include the EB-5 immigrant visa, the E2 non-immigrant visa. Processing and timelines. Right on your screen, you'll see a timeline of the EB-5 process. Step one, to me, is the most critical step of the whole process. It's proper due diligence. This is where 90% of clients fail. They fail in failing to do proper due diligence on an EB-5 project. There are two kinds of due diligence. One is making sure you get a green card. A green card lawyer, an immigration lawyer, can help you with that. Second is making sure that the project is properly structured. That is beyond the competency of an immigration lawyer. That is a competency of a real estate finance lawyer. If you do both those kinds of due diligence and seek proper financial advice, EB-5 represents an excellent and safe investment. Step one, once you've completed that due diligence and understand the risks, is making the investment in your selected project. Once you've made that investment, the I-526 will then proceed. I-526 processing times have varied dramatically. I-526 processing times, as we see it, seem to cluster together by project. Large regional centers offering what I call vanilla EB-5 projects, in the experience of our firm, which is a very limited data set, so may not be representative of the market, seem to process more quickly. If you're in China or Vietnam, you'll then be subject to a retrogression delay. India was subject to this delay, but just came out of this delay. Once you clear the retrogression delay, you're then subject to immigrant visa processing. Immigrant visa processing can take 2 to 6 months in the local consulate. Don't accept a lie from an immigration lawyer that they can't assist you in the interview. Often, a consulate will not allow a lawyer in an immigrant visa interview. That is not true in many jurisdictions. Often it's just that the immigration lawyer is in the United States and doesn't want to get on a plane to help you with your immigrant interview. In some countries, it's not possible. In other countries, it is. Make sure that your immigration lawyer properly trains you and preps you for that interview. When you look at that process, there's the different steps to the process, and the timing is going to vary significantly according to your country of birth. Remember, for EB-5, what is relevant is and with retrogression, is your country of birth and not your country of nationality. Sometimes people come with a question. if I buy a Grenada passport or a Turkish passport, can I avoid visa retrogression in EB-5? The answer is no, you cannot, because it's based on your country of birth. Conversely, I could be a Chinese or an Indian citizen, and if I was born in Oman, then I might not be subject to retrogression because I come under the Omani visa count. Once I have my immigrant visa, I am then in a process where I can enter the United States. I would then remain in a situation of conditional residency. I prefer to call this a temporary green card as opposed to a conditional green card. The reason for that is a lot of clients think of a conditional green card as not being the same as a full green card, and it is. The difference between a full green card and a conditional green card is that a conditional green card is valid for a temporary period of 2 years. 90 days before that 2 years expires, you're going to apply to have the conditions on that green card removed. The conditions just mean the 2-year time limit. You file Form I-829 to have those conditions removed. Once you've filed Form I-829, it then, under the immigration law, potentially becomes possible to have your funds returned to you, but maintain your green card. However, there's 2 aspects to this. The first is immigration law, and the second is the contract that you signed with the regional center. And the longer of those 2 periods is going to apply. So you get your money back the longer of whatever the applicable immigration period is, which could change. Right now, it's after you file the I-829. We always recommend clients wait for an I-829 that's been approved in their project before they get their money back. If anyone wants to know why, I can explain why afterwards. Or the time that it says in the contract that you signed, the regional center will return their money to you. So it's the longer of those 2 periods for the money back. I-829 processing periods are on the US government website. So it's not open to debate. It's public record. Roughly 1 to 2 years, perhaps 2 years, I-829 processing time. 2 plus 2 is 4 years. So roughly 4 years after you obtain your conditional residency in the United States, you can expect to obtain an unconditional green card. The next step in the process for a lot of our clients is that 5 years after they first obtain that conditional residency, they become potentially eligible for naturalization as a US citizen. There are certain other conditions that apply to meet that. So for most clients, after they enter the United States, there are 2 sets of rules that apply. There's one set of rules for maintaining your residency as a green card holder, and a different set of rules for becoming eligible for a US passport. If people have questions on that, we can give more detail afterwards. Why clients choose DNA? Clients come back to our firm usually by referral from another firm who's been successful in the EB-5 process. You can see sort of a little bit about our firm. We have presences across the world, including our newest office, which is where I am in Hanoi. We literally signed a lease yesterday of 1 year. So we now have 3 offices in India and 2 offices in Vietnam, with local staff in both countries who are experienced with EB-5. We have an EB-5 source of funds team in Chicago who are positioned and available to help you, with, the head of the team based in Chicago, and EB-5 lawyers in different locations. We also have different teams who cover other kinds of visas. Another kind of visa might be relevant because it may enable you to move to the United States faster while your EB-5 is pending. We also have a team who can help you with tax planning. Our team are experienced tax lawyers who can help you devise a plan to shelter taxes. I will say that for some clients, using a tax lawyer tends to be uneconomic. So we would always suggest for clients who have lower net worths to use a CPA, which is going to be a cheaper, a cheaper solution. Clients who have more net worth probably benefit from the advantages of a tax lawyer and constructing complex international strategies. Another difference, loan due diligence, we talked about. It's key now as we see these projects coming around that you have a lawyer who understands real estate finance and real estate investments, look at the project. We can truthfully, with our hands on our hearts, say a lot of the projects that are experiencing difficulties, we advise clients not that they should or shouldn't invest in the project, but of non-immigration real estate structuring and real estate investment issues with those projects. Clients who avoided those projects and are now not having difficulties with their investments. Currency remittance planning. This has to do with local laws in jurisdictions such as India that are restricted in terms of moving currencies out of the country. We spend a lot of time on this, and this is probably a major difference between us and other law firms. In India, we have local lawyers who are experienced with the liberalized remittance scheme. In Vietnam, just yesterday, I spent about 2 or 3 hours with a Vietnamese lawyer going through how to make sure that clients are not at risk. A lot of cases in this country now seem to be having some questions at USCIS. From what I can see, that's unnecessary if you go with a lead agent who really understands the way this works, and who a lawyer who's really able to check that for you. So 10 years success in EB-5, that's our law firm, that's what we do, and we'd love to be part of your success in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We're now going to have Matt and Mark discuss some important topics of interest. They're going to cover the current environment of EB-5, how COVID-19 has affected the immigration ban, and then finally they will discuss the visa availability and processing times. So Matt and Mark.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Hogan, Vice President of Project Development from CMB. I want to thank all of you for joining. Actually, I'll take a stab at some of these issues first because I think Mark did cover some of them on his PowerPoint. In particular, what's happened in EB-5 processing times, kind of changes in the rules and regulations that went through in November of last year. But I want to start by talking a little bit about some exciting news that's been happening here at CMB. Since COVID-19 has impacted the world, I think it's caused a lot of people to, think inwardly, to think about their family, to think about planning for the future. And honestly, I think in a lot of people's mindsets, it's caused them to start thinking about, where do they want to be long-term? And as Mark mentioned, the United States is still destination number one for a lot of clients from around the world. And so we've still continued to see some momentum building at CMB over the last several months. In fact, we recently just closed out our CMB Group 69 partnership in Greenville, South Carolina. So it's proof positive that people are still considering EB-5 investments around the world, and they're still continuing to move forward in EB-5 investments. And a lot of people, I think that would come as a surprise. How have you already closed out an EB-5 partnership? Didn't that price increase cause some investors to pause? Well, it's actually interesting. Our Group 69 partnership was actually released under the old EB-5 regulations. In fact, it qualified not only under the old regulations, but it was designed to qualify under these new regulations. And a lot of people say, well, how the heck did you do that? Well, it was simple. We've always been a regional center that's had a lot of integrity. We've always been a regional center that's tried to focus on following the rules and regulations of the program. And we've never cheated the TEAs. So when we took that project to the market in 2019, we knew that it was a project that would continue to be able to subscribe investors on both sides of those regulatory changes. And so we're really excited to announce that we have closed that partnership out. And actually, in the next few weeks, it looks like we're going to close out our second EB-5 partnership that we have been working on here in 2020, our CMB Group 74 partnership in San Antonio, Texas. So it looks like those two partnerships will have been closed out. And so again, it's proof positive that EB-5 is still carrying that momentum. We still see investors with a high degree of demand for EB-5 because as part of what Mark mentioned, it's really, it's still, I guess to rephrase, it's still probably the best path forward that someone can take to making sure that themselves and their family can have permanent residency in the United States. The EB-5 Investor Visa Program is a program that still gives people the highest level of success in being able to achieve their long-term goals of getting themselves and their family permanent residency in the United States. And with all the other issues that are plaguing some of the other immigration categories, it is still one of the immigration categories that I think provides the safest path forward to ensuring that you can achieve that goal. To add to that a little bit more, what's happened in EB-5 post-COVID? Well, certainly we've seen an industry over the years that's focused very heavily on certain asset types, hospitality in particular. Right now, there are a lot of regional centers out there that are really working hard to try and solve their own internal problems as far as how they deal with the challenges that COVID has presented from an economic standpoint. Mark mentioned something that I think that I can't pass up and I can't go without mentioning because it's so important. There are a lot of other regional centers out there that were really developers that structured a regional center to go out and raise money for their own projects. And when they've faced challenges from COVID, whether it be a hotel project, whether it be a luxury residential project, what have you, they've pushed the interest of their EB-5 investors aside. We've seen this happening throughout the industry. We've in fact seen it over the years. It wasn't just COVID where we've seen this happen. But you really have to think about, if your project that you've invested into could face challenges in the future, who's going to be there to help you through that process? Who's going to be the advocate for you? We invited Mark to this because Mark is a quality immigration attorney with his own track history of helping clients around the world. We don't require that you work with Mark. We work with many attorneys. We can provide recommendations on attorneys, just as Mark looks at many different regional centers and provides recommendations for his clients to due diligence on several regional centers. But you need an advocate. You should have an advocate for you on your immigration side. That's what someone like Mark is there for. But you also need an advocate to protect your actual investment, your actual EB-5 investment, to make sure that job creation takes place and to make sure that you have your money back. We're structured as a regional center that goes out and looks at projects to try and find developers to work with and try and find opportunities that we think can fit for you. And if something happens, it's our role, our responsibility to continue to push and fight for those clients to make sure that their interests are protected. And so where we're seeing challenges throughout the industry that have really impacted investors is economic changes that have happened post-COVID and will continue to happen, because really no one knows what the future will hold for COVID. The world is still very much being impacted in a real way. But you need to have someone who's gonna be there, who's gonna fight for you, who's gonna advocate for you. And so right now, what I'd tell you is what's happening in EB-5 and COVID. Well, I think there's some concern. I think that there's some concern in that you need to make sure that you're working with a quality regional center. I think the asset type that you look at is important too. Certain asset types are going to be more impacted than others. Hotels, luxury residential, resorts, things like that will fluctuate when the economy changes significantly. And they could be impacted significantly by COVID. These are things that I think people need to know about when they're considering EB-5 in this, COVID-19 environment. So just a few things from my side of it that I think are important, and I'll turn it back over to Mark to kind of add to this. Look, one of the things that I think that is important is that although there's some concern out there in terms of project selection, there are still great opportunities. And if you can work with a regional center that knows what they're doing and a developer that has been able to stand the test of time. So if you can find somebody that can partner, or that that the regional center can partner with, who can take on quality opportunities, who has been able to navigate challenges that the economy has thrown at them, whether it be, post 9/11, the Great Recession, and now COVID-19, I think you can find risk mitigated opportunities that can still give you all of the great opportunity to be able to achieve your goals and get to the United States and remain there permanently on an EB-5 visa. We have those opportunities. We're excited to present those opportunities, and I'll talk about those in the future, or here in a little bit. But what I want to stress is that, EB-5 is continuing to grow and evolve. It's continuing to, demand is continuing to pick up and to build. We're still seeing investors every day that are interested and moving forward. They're going to do more due diligence. So it's important that we, as an industry, provide great opportunities. We're fully transparent. I think you'll see that in CMB. People who have already looked at CMB are seeing that. And I think that if you're going to look at other regional center projects, or if you're working with an attorney, leave no stone unturned. Ask every question that you have. Make sure that that EB-5 regional center is transparent with you. And I think that you'll see that there are still quality EB-5 opportunities available. So here, I'll turn it over to Mark. Mark, let's touch on some of these other issues. I guess a good one would be, Mark, how have you seen COVID-19 impact your the clients that you've worked with? How have you seen COVID-19 impact the industry in any way?
Am I live?
Yes.
Okay. So in terms of the way that COVID-19 has impacted EB-5, I think everybody saw a really big slowdown in EB-5 when the pricing went up around about November of last year. I think the whole industry saw that. I think that in India, as probably the most established EB-5 player in India, we expected, and other people did too, to see the Indian market start to pick up probably around April, May, especially coming into September. I think that COVID has slowed that process down. It's been difficult to get money out of India. It's been difficult to go to the banks. However, one thing in India is, remember the new withholding tax. So, we need to be careful and recognize that's a withholding of a tax that was properly payable before. However, that was a new tax in the Indian budget this year. That tax has now been postponed, or withholding tax has been postponed through to October the 1st. So we certainly have Indians who are aware of the fact that if they wait for EB-5 until after October the 1st, their bank, their foreign exchange bank, is now going to withhold 5% withholding tax. That's significant for a number of our clients. So we see EB-5 picking up right now, despite COVID in India, interest in EB-5 picking up. How much of that has to do with saving withholding tax? I don't know. I can't answer that question. I can just tell you the withholding tax is there as a real issue. And I can tell you that clients are starting to show interest in India in EB-5. I'm in Vietnam right now. And in Vietnam, which has been a big EB-5 market too, in the last probably three to 5 days, we've been asked to be involved with potentially a number of new cases. And I would say that having been sort of very quiet or dead here for a few weeks in the COVID period, there seems to be some interest here right now in this market. Throughout the COVID period, my colleague, one of my colleagues, David at our firm, specializes in Africa. I don't really, West Africa and South Africa. So we continued to see EB-5 filings from West Africa and South Africa through COVID. Were those in anything like the volumes that we were seeing previously? No, but they were there. So I think that's sort of how we would see, as a law firm, we haven't been heavily involved in China. So although that's historically the largest EB-5 market, I'll choose not to comment on China. And there are some reasons why we decided not to go to China. But, China crashed, right? China, most big regional centers will tell you, if they're being truthful, that they were seeing 10%, roughly 10% filings in the last couple of years of what it historically had been in China. So I think that's probably how we see COVID. We definitely see interest right now in all of the investor visa products in the United States beginning to pick up. And that raises the question, if you're Indian, right now you're not in retrogression. The US State Department has said that that's got to do with I-526 approvals and I-526 processings and basically a lack of visa demand. But if things really start to pick up, if I'm Indian, for tax reasons and for I-526 processing reasons, visa demand reasons, I would probably file now. And as I said, we've been in India for 10 years, and I think we have a pretty good pulse on that market. So does that help, Matt?
Yeah, it does. Mark, let me ask you another question. So I think it's important for a lot of people to understand, this kind of recent immigration ban, or I've called it a pause on immigration that the U.S. government has put forth. Can you tell us about, first and foremost, some of the ways that that's going to impact other immigration categories that people, families might be looking at, and whether or not that's impacting EB-5? You touched on it a little bit, but I think it'd be good to expand on it.
So, I mean, it's certainly been the case that I think, with your clients and ours, that a huge driver has been students, right? Families with kids who are going to school in the United States. And they can get a student visa until recently, and we can talk about what's happened in the last week, but that's it's a different, slightly off topic. Until the last week, there hasn't been a problem with student visas. So what we've seen is families wanting their kids to go to America. The problem is when they graduate, the OPT system's been there, but the H-1B system has been under political attack now for many years. It's not just the Trump government. People say it's Trump. That's just not true. The Obama government attacked the H-1B program. Politicians of both political divides have taken disfavor with the H-1B program. So, you hear some people say the H-1B program is going to get totally shut down. I don't know if that's true or false. That's just what you hear some politicians say. It certainly is getting significantly curtailed. Right now, Trump has shut it down through the end of the year. What the potential extension on that is, we don't really know, but it's not available right now. Furthermore, the Trump government has attacked student visas with ICE, saying that if it's basically an online course, you have to leave the United States and you won't be issued a student visa. So that, COVID plays into that, makes it quite difficult. But what we do know is with both non-immigrant and immigrant visa categories for investment, there's an exception. And America right now is saying, welcome to the United States. If you want to come as an investor, we embrace you, we welcome you, and we want you here. So I would say that a lot of parents are thinking about that. They're saying, well, if I get my child an investor visa, as things are right now, America's saying, welcome to the United States. We want you. If they're trying to go the student route and push them through H-1B, things are getting increasingly difficult. Does that answer the question, Matt?
Absolutely, it's perfect. And it goes to what I was saying before. I think a lot of people, their goal is straightforward and simple when they're looking at EB-5. It's, how do I get to the United States? How do I remain there permanently? How do I make sure that my family is able to join with me and that they don't have to leave at some point in time? There are other immigration categories that can allow somebody to come over for temporary purposes, or as you mentioned, H-1B, that might require that an employee sponsor or employer sponsor that employee. But EB-5 gives you that permanent solution to being in the United States. Also, as we've mentioned, your spouse and any unmarried children under the age of 21 are able to be in the United States on a permanent basis. So even if they're already there right now on some other visa category, some non-permanent immigration or a non-immigrant category, if they file for EB-5, it could give them the opportunity to change their status and remain in the United States on a permanent basis and not have to worry about the political side of whether or not some of these other immigration categories are going to be impacted.
Matt, we know, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
We know EB-5 is great for students, right? No one's going to debate that. It's just true. So the other category we see is like business families. They might be able to go to America on an L. Right now they can't go to America on an L1, but traditionally on an L1 or perhaps an E2 or some other kind of visa to start a business. Sure. But they want to be there long term. And so it's hard, they want no risk long term. How many of your clients, perhaps business owners, or perhaps there's some examples, business owners who want to be in America long term, perhaps they opened a furniture shop, whatever they've done to be in America now, but long term want to be certain of their success and have come to you for that.
That is their primary goal. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because what we see is we see a lot of people coming to the United States, sometimes, as Mark mentioned, on other immigration categories, but they realize that there's risk associated to them remaining there. They have to continue to operate that business, or they have to continue to abide by the non-permanent, visa category that they're in the United States under. And they get tired of it after a while. Everybody wants to retire at some point in time. The other thing is that We see wealthy foreign nationals from around the world that have had a high level of success in business. And when they come to the United States, they don't want to have to run a coffee shop, or they don't want to have to, run a small business. They want to be able to come to the United States. They want to kind of maintain a portion of their business interests, around the world. But when they get to the United States, they want to enjoy the United States. They don't necessarily want to be a part of that. And they definitely don't want to take on that risk that they have to continuously reapply, or that they have to continuously kind of meet the criteria of their non-immigrant category. So regularly, we see people come to us and say, hey, I've been here on this other visa category, and now, I'm ready for it to be permanent. I'm ready to be here and not have to think about this. And that's exactly what EB-5 does for these people.
Do you have any clients who have tried EB-3? So one of the bluntly scams that we see in immigration are businesses in America that are in this business of procuring phony job offers for foreign persons in the EB-3 category. The idea that someone who's a highly paid professional here in Vietnam is going to go to America to cut the grass is absurd. And US immigration know that. So
Yes.
Do you see like people who have done EB-3 and regret doing it coming to you? Or
we've heard of those cases, yeah. And so we've heard of those cases. And I think that they're more widespread than what people might realize. And here, we always say this, why cheat your future? Why do you want to, try and cut a corner? I'm sure you say the same thing to clients who, who have source of funds issues that you identify, and you provide them with opportunities to solve those problems. You don't want to cut any corner that could jeopardize your ability to be in the United States long term. So if someone's going to come over on, some sort of scheme like that, ultimately what they're doing is they're jeopardizing their future and their family's future. EB-5 is pretty simple and straightforward.
Just a caveat, right? There are certain people who genuinely meet the requirements of the EB-3 visa program, and it's honest and true, and those are great people to do that program. But a lot of people doing that program, yes. Right? So there is a real EB-3 program, and if you meet it, that's great. But I was on a call with 3 other immigration firms the other week, and they were talking about this, saying basically, what a fraud, what a scam, and the U.S. government needs to do something about it.
No, you're absolutely right, and that needs to be said. Yes, there are perfectly legitimate EB-3 cases that move forward, and that's the best path for those individuals. But then we see these other situations in which someone might try and cut a corner or cheat that program, and ultimately, again, and not to sound like a broken record, what it does is it jeopardizes their future. EB-5, in my opinion, is simple and straightforward, and it's that path to being there permanently that I think those same people often could take on. They just see some other opportunity available to themselves, and they don't really think it through entirely. When you think it through, EB-5 gives them that benefit.
Another question, Matt. So, as we talk to clients, as you know, one of the things we do is we spend a lot of time looking at projects to make sure that they're structured from a non-immigration but legal perspective.
Right.
One of the questions we get asked is, right now, is, well, there's all these projects in the market, right, that are falling apart. And that's just the truth. And people say, well, they're falling apart because of COVID. I don't think that's true. I think that, a lot of these projects were set up that as soon as the economic winds blew in the other direction, they were going to fall apart. And they were structured so that they didn't protect EB-5 investors. I know you guys have never had a project failure. So talk to us, if you will, about, in the current environment, what do you do with your projects to due diligence and set them up and structure them so your investors are protected if the economic winds blow in the wrong direction a little bit?
Sure. And here, there are a couple of things, and I want to expand on what Mark is saying. CMB, as a regional center, we are an open book. And in fact, starting with our 2014 data, we started in 2015 having regular audits of each and every one of our partnerships, all of our partnerships, as well as all of our statistics. So when we say we have 100% approval of all of our partnerships, when we say we have a certain amount of I-526 approvals or I-829s, those are actually audited by a third-party accounting firm, and we can make that information available to our limited partners or to investors who or prospective investors who have signed an NDA and want to be able to kind of see what CMB is all about. And so I'll start with that. And, look, COVID-19 and the challenges of COVID-19 have really created an unprecedented situation. And in years past, I've had people ask me certain questions about what's the worst case scenario, what happens here, what happens there. And COVID-19 for a lot of projects has created a situation that no one could have possibly modeled for. No due diligence, no protections, no things like that could have completely isolated any individual project from some of the challenges that COVID-19 has faced. But here's what's important. And I mentioned it before. What happens when there are some challenges? What happens if the project starts to go through some downturns in its economic cycles or what have you, or starts to have some challenges in paying its debt service? Or take, for instance, the hospitality industry, as I mentioned earlier. I was talking with our CEO, my uncle Pat Hogan, about EB-5 in general and about COVID-19. And he had recently saw a stat that said that the hospitality industry as a whole across the United States was operating at less than 33% occupancy. And so no developer, no hotel operator plans for how they're going to keep the project, booming, and how they're going to keep the project economically viable at a point in time in which they may face long-term shortfalls in their occupancy numbers. But so what you can do, and what we've done, and what we've had a high degree of success in doing, is that we can look at, before we ever take on that project, how do we position ourselves? What leverage can we create in the collateral that we're going to have for that particular opportunity? So if things do go wrong, what power can we have to help control the situation? The other thing we do, and this starts the day we sign that loan agreement, is we have an in-house compliance team. So they're seeing all of the reporting information that's coming out. We have certain requirements where if there's any circumstance that could materially impact the operations of the project or their ability to service the debt or repay the debt, they have to notify us of those things. And we regularly reach out. When COVID-19 first hit back in March, and it really started to shut down some of the US economy, we immediately reached out to every single one of our borrowers to put them on notice that they have to keep us fully apprised of those situations. So early action on a lot of those projects has allowed us to identify issues, work with our borrowers, and try and identify what can be done to keep the project on the right trajectory. And Mark said something, and I think it doesn't, I need to make sure that I speak to it. We have had projects that have had challenges. To be a completely transparent and open book, we've certainly have had projects that have had challenges. It's not that every single project that we've taken on has been absolutely perfect and it's had no instances where there's been some level of doubt that there's going to be success from an economic standpoint. Of course, we've had to face those challenges though. What we're seeing right now, and in particular, and I mentioned it earlier, and I think Mark touched on it, some of these developer-driven models. What we try and do is we try and serve as an advocate for each and every one of our EB-5 investors. So we're looking out to make sure that their interests are protected and they're served. And I'll talk about it in my PowerPoint in a little bit, but when we structure a loan, our duties are to enforce the terms and conditions of that loan agreement. It's not to build the building. It's not to make money off of the operations of the building in the future. We don't have that same conflict of interest. So if our deals have challenges or if our deals start to go bad, we're going to step in and we're going to do what we need to do to protect our EB-5 investors. A developer, they might say, okay, well, the EB-5 investors provided us some money. Thank you, EB-5 investors. But now we have to right our own ship. Now we have to make sure that this project can be economically viable. And if the EB-5 investors don't get what they want, hey, that's not our problem. And we've seen that happen. We've seen that play out with some of the biggest EB-5 projects that have made substantial headlines over the last couple of years. We've seen those developer-driven models push the interests of the EB-5 investors aside. And so I guess what I want to say is that how have we been able to meet some of these challenges? First of all, upfront due diligence, structuring of these loans in such a way where we can create some leverage, where we can have a seat at the table to make sure that if there are challenges that we can be proactive, that we can have a voice in how they can be solved, that we can have the ability to push our borrowers to meet certain conditions and criteria. And then it's ongoing compliance, ongoing due diligence. It never stops. From the point in time in which the investor invests, we maintain contact with those investors. We keep them up to speed on everything that's happening. We make sure that they understand what challenges the project could be facing. And then, until the day in which those loans are repaid or our investors receive a return of their capital, we need to be an advocate for them. We need to be a steward of their investment. We need to make sure that their immigration goals are met and they receive the return of their capital.
I'm just looking at questions. So gentleman is asking, there's several people asking about EB-5 processing times. I can answer it, but let's let you. So the question is generally, I think there's a misunderstanding on, does retrogression stroke visa backlog impact I-526 processing times? What's the relationship between those two things? And how does my nationality play into this? So someone's asking, if I'm a Pakistani individual, a person of Pakistani origin, where am I in this processing? So perhaps it would be helpful to get an overview of that. And perhaps you can explain, if I'm Chinese, Vietnamese as one category, then perhaps Indian, Brazilian as another category, and then everybody else, how that might all work out.
Sure. And so Mark's PowerPoint, if you think of that timeline, started to talk about this a little bit. And, there are really two important steps, and these are the steps that can be time consuming to the EB-5 investor's perspective. And that is the I-526 adjudication. And then after you receive the I-526 adjudication, it's the waiting time that impacts certain countries that are what they call retrogressed, meaning there's a backlog of clients who would like to obtain an EB-5 visa, but there are not visas available, immediately available for investors from those particular countries. And so what you have right now is you have certain countries, in particular China and Vietnam, that are still impacted by visa backlog, visa retrogression, meaning there are more investors that have obtained their 526 petition approvals and who are seeking the visa than there are visas available for investors from those countries. Right now, there's anticipated, and Mark, please correct me, but I believe that the backlog right now in China is something over 14 years or 15 years, meaning if someone invests today from China, they still think that it could take as long as 14 or 15 years before a visa could become available for that person. Now, that timeline is inclusive of both the I-526 adjudication period and the waiting time that they would have before they can receive a visa. I believe in Vietnam, I think it's something like 6 or 7 years in total from the point in time in which someone invests until the time in which they can receive a visa. You mentioned earlier India, and frankly, every other country, whether it be Brazil or Pakistan or every other country, they are what they call current, meaning right now there is no visa backlog for investors who are eligible to receive visas. So if you have an I-526 petition approval and you're now eligible to go and receive a visa, there is no waiting line. Your visa is immediately available for you if you are from one of those countries. However, if the pool of 526 petitions for any one country is so great that over a period of time, the number of applicants that have approved I-526 petitions and then go seek a visa, if that extends past 700 visas, because again, each country is only eligible to receive 700 visas in a calendar year. If that number of visa applicants exceeds 700, it will create what they call retrogression, meaning a visa backlog where it may take another year, and depending on the size of that pool, could increase over time. Does that help answer it?
I think, see, India, right, to me, you have to be honest with people. I hear a lot of people saying India's not in let's be clear. Retrogression means something slightly different to visa backlog. India's actually not had retrogression, but they have had visa backlog. So India came out of visa backlog. And when people say they're not in visa backlog, that's true. However, we also know that the State Department has said basically that's because I-526 processing has been so slow that there's an artificially low amount of visa demand for Indians. That's compounded by the fact that the consulates are closed right now. So I can't get a visa. Even though EB-5 is exempted, if the consulate is physically closed, I can't go to the visa and I can't get a consulate. I can't get a visa. So what the State Department has said is when things sort of become real and India kind of catches up to itself, India might well slide back into backlog stroke retrogression. What that means to me is if I'm Indian and looking to do it bluntly, I'd probably file now and try and get through. Is there any guarantee that I can get through this sort of system without getting back into retrogression? No. And anyone who tells you that's a liar. But I think you've got a decent shot right now. What do you think, Matt?
I think so too. I mean, here, another thing that you touched on earlier. So, one of the things that, as you mentioned, is compounding this issue is the delay in I-526 adjudication at the USCIS. We're seeing those timeframes, vary, and they've even, in fact, changed some of their adjudicating practices. In the past, it was first in, first out. All investors from all countries were, effectively placed in a pile. The first petition received was adjudicated. And now what they're claiming they're going to do is start adjudicating those petitions based on priority date and visa availability. So if you have a country that is not impacted by retrogression, they're going to look at the first person who filed from those countries where a visa is available based on priority date and adjudicate those petitions first. And so, it remains a little bit unclear exactly how that will play out over the next several months. We expect that for people who are not in countries impacted by visa delay, it may speed up their process a little bit. It's our hope that it will speed up their process a little bit.
Gotcha.
In particular to India right now, because there's no, final action date. It is technically current. There's currently no visa backlog. I think our hope is that we'll start to see a significant number of 526 petitions adjudicated out of India. Now, whether or not they'll do it based on priority dates and they'll look at those oldest petitions in first or not, or if they'll look at newer petitions, that remains to be seen. And so I think what we can do as a regional center is we can put the most simple, straightforward projects in front of the USCIS such that we don't, do anything that's outside the realm of normal, meaning we don't do anything that's an untested plan. We don't do anything that causes them pause for concern. We put forth EB-5 projects that are well thought out. We bake in, our 23 years of experience into each one of our petitions. And if we stick to that same model,
I agree with you. I think that one of the things you want to look for in an EB-5 project is something that's vanilla, because you can have a really wonderful project. As an example, I won't name the regional center in the market right now, which is a huge project, which we cautioned our investors on. And as a result, we only have one investor. Every other law firm has hundreds of investors in it, those of any size. But that project is so complicated and convoluted that in my mind, EB-5 investors have no business being in that project. Much better to go with something that's vanilla, what I call vanilla, easily understood. That's good for your green card, and that's good to protect your money. Right?
And I think our hope, and as you touched on it, our hope is that if we stick to those simple, straightforward, easy to understand projects, it will also help the USCIS. We won't be plagued by questions where they have to reconsider certain elements of what we're trying to put forth. We may or may not see RFEs on the project that we have to answer that will delay the overall adjudication of the project. And if we can do that, our hope is that we'll see, a more timely adjudication, and the investors that move forward from India in particular may have a shot at getting a 526 petition approval in a appropriate amount of time that would allow them to take advantage of kind of this limited visa demand that we're seeing right now.
So there's two sets of questions I can see here. One is to do with project workouts, which I spent the first part of my career representing investment banks doing distressed real estate financing. So I'm happy to talk about that one. Probably and bore everybody, and our participants will go to zero by the time I get to the end of what I have to say. But proper due diligence can avoid those problems. There's no reason to be in a project that's gone wrong. And I can give you categorical examples of things you can ask for upfront on due diligence that generally people don't, that will flush out. Can you detect every problem project? No, but you can. If your project goes into difficulties, then there's a whole roster of things that you need to assertively do. This idea that there's nothing you can do because you're just an EB-5 investor is a pack of lies put out by people who don't want you to make a nuisance of yourself. So we know that that's just not true. And in fact, by not taking action, you jeopardize your interests. So that's I'm just looking at that. And we can talk about that in more detail. But another question that's come up, and I think I know the answer that you guys have, is someone's asking, do we have to invest the full 900,000 or 1.8 million upfront, or can it be staggered over time?
Yeah, right now we're structured such that the full 900,000 has to be invested. So the full $900,000 investment has to be made available to the new commercial enterprise. That new commercial enterprise then makes that available to the project that will actually create the jobs. And so there are other regional centers that have structured things in such a way that you can invest some now and some later. That's a model that CMB is continuing to look at, but right now we require the full 900,000. And our thought there is that it protects each and every investor. And is it possible to invest some now and some later? It's possible. And we know that the industry has seen approvals, but I also think that it can in some ways jeopardize the viability of the project. And depending on the project and the timeline of that project and when they need the funds, we don't want to be in a situation where we have some investors invest some now and fail to make the subsequent investment later. In our opinion, throughout this entire process has been, look at what has happened with COVID.
So Matt, just to cut you short, because there's other questions coming up. I think what you're saying is, under the law and under the regulations, it's possible to invest some of the money now and the rest over time, right? When does all of the money have to be invested by under the law?
The full investment has to take, so this is a question that can kind of go a couple of different directions. So the USCIS requires that the investment funds be made available for job creation. And so from a conservative perspective, how we say it may be a little bit more conservative than even what the law in particular requires. And I'll yield that to you, Mark, but what we require, or what we would require if we were ever to look at a model like that, is that the full EB-5 investment dollars be remitted at a point in time in which the project still has the ability to use those towards job creation. So what I mean by that is, let's say it's an 18-month construction period. If you put half of the money in now, but you can't get the other half of the money in over the next 18 months, then I think that, you may be leaving yourself open to challenge from the USCIS that your money was actually used for job creation.
What I think is this, right? There's a legal answer and then there's a practical answer. The legal answer is you can stretch this out over time. You can put your money in, I think you've got 2 years plus a reasonable period, which has been defined to be 1 year after you get the initial approval, really. However, you have to look at what's a stable project. Where are the best stable projects, right? Where am I going to get my green card and where is my capital going to be protected? And in the world of regional center EB-5s, it's all of the reputable regional centers, and I'd include yours in one of those that we work with. I don't know anyone that's going to do that because they're building a building, right? Or their borrower is building a building. Their client is building a building. They need money to build the building. And to be honest, and I'll let you comment then, Matt, I think it's a huge red flag. If you have a regional center that's willing to, a little bit is reasonable. For example, if I'm an Indian client and it's getting towards the end of the Indian tax year, and I say for purposes of liberalized remittance scheme, I want to send 250 now and 250 after April the 1st, bluntly, Matt's regional center played ball with that and others have too. That's a little different to somebody who says, yeah, you can structure this whole thing over time. That begins to look like someone who's desperate for capital and it becomes a red flag.
I couldn't agree more. And I think about it from that perspective. And you nailed it, Mark. We have developers who need that capital to build a building. Conversely, our regional center investors want to rely on the job creation that's coming out of that. So we don't want to have anything that would jeopardize the ability to see that. What I was going to touch on is you think of how the economy has changed through the impacts of COVID. There might have been investors at the end of last year who invested half, who are now really sitting there considering whether or not they still want to put the other half in because of everything that's changed with COVID. Do you really want to be a fully invested investor in one of those projects who's looking at the guy next to you who's considering not fulfilling the rest of their investment requirement? Think of the impacts that could have on the partnership that you've invested into. whether or not the developer is going to be able to have additional capital that they need to complete the project, whether or not it's going to cause, some
what
sort
I
of
see is
comfort.
most of the good projects, most of the good developers, right? They can get money somewhere else. They can get relatively cheap money somewhere else. Sure, EB-5 might be the cheapest money, so they'll go for it if they can get it. But they're not going to delay their project construction timelines to allow for EB-5 because the money just ain't that cheap, right?
Yep. And you know what else they're going to do? If they have the opportunity, and I know you've seen this in documents before, Mark, if they can't get all of that money in place, and they don't have another mechanism to get it, the likelihood is that they're going to subordinate the interest of the EB-5 investors to the additional capital that they need to complete that project.
We've talked about this before, Matt. That is, immigration lawyers are going to say, not my issue, right? And it isn't an immigration law issue. But it's real estate due diligence 101. Check. Does the project have the ability to subordinate you as an EB-5 creditor? Some of the provisions in the regional center projects are horrendous in this regard. And bluntly, immigration lawyers should be shot in the head publicly for allowing their clients to invest in those projects without alerting them to the presence of those clauses. Now, if a client knows about the clause and moves ahead, I don't have a problem with that. But failure to notify the client about the clause, that's to me, that's gross malpractice. What do you think?
I don't disagree. And I think that if you're an investor considering a project that will take time to raise the EB-5 capital, you need to be confident that the developer has other mechanisms to complete that project without the likelihood that they'll simply be subordinating the interests of the EB-5 investors to other debt. So
I think there's a question here that sort of shows a misunderstanding, Matt. The question is, what is the approximate time frame for CMB to return investment funds? So, the first comment I would have is CMB doesn't return any investment funds to anybody. There's individual projects, right? And the individual project partnership returns investment funds. CMB or any other major regional center functions effectively as the asset manager that, if you like, sort of polices that and then gets involved with the management. So perhaps you can explain that to make it clear.
sure.
And then the regional center, the time that they return the funds, right, is it not a regional center thing? That's an irrelevant question. Every project varies. You've got to read the project documents. So, I'll let you see if you agree, see if you disagree. But what do you think?
Sure, I absolutely agree. So here, and I'm going to get to this in a second, and we'll need to jump into part of my presentation, which will cover this here in a second. But, Mark's hitting the nail on the head. So first of all, what happens in most regional centers nowadays, the EB-5 Regional Center, or the sponsor, is forming a limited partnership that investors are investing into, and that limited partnership is making a loan to a borrower. So first and foremost, in order for capital to be repaid, the borrower has to repay that loan. There's a loan that takes place in there. It's collateralized, it's secured, it's got a term. Ours are all structured for 6 years. At the end of that 6 years, the borrower repays the partnership. And then the partnership looks to evaluate returning capital to clients who meet the eligibility requirements. And Mark touched on those earlier. The USCIS requires that every investor complete their 2-year conditional permanent residency period before they become eligible to receive the return of their capital. And so the first thing that needs to happen, that loan needs to be repaid to the partnership, and then it's the partnership that returns that capital. You're not loaning money to CMB for our own uses, and then we give some of it to a borrower to complete the project. You're actually investing into a unique partnership that has very limited ability to use that capital to meet the investment criteria that's been outlined in your private placement memorandum and to meet the immigration needs and fiduciary needs of each individual investor. CMB serves as the general partner or the manager of that investment partnership, enforces the terms and conditions of the loan, and serves as a fiduciary to make sure that funds stay invested to meet the immigration and other goals of the EB-5 investors. So I think that touches on that. Why don't I jump to my presentation? I think it'll give you a little bit more information on CMB. It will hit on some of these, and then it'll give us the opportunity to talk a little bit about our CMB Group 78 partnership. And then after that, we'll open the floor back to additional questions, because these are great questions that are coming in. Okay. All right, I think everyone can see my screen now. And so again, we're CMB Regional Centers. As many of you know, CMB is one of the largest active regional centers in the industry. We have over 20 years of experience. Now this is important, and I want to touch on this very briefly. The CMB represents over 5,700 EB-5 investors from around the world. In fact, over 102 countries. So we have a global footprint. We have investors from all over the world. Something that's really important that I always like to talk about is how many languages that we actually have in-house. How many people that are employed by CMB speak different languages? We actually have people that speak 14 different languages in-house. And we also have people based around the world. We have permanent representatives with our sister company, CMB Swissco, that work out of Switzerland, that work out of China, that work out of Vietnam, India, and then also Istanbul. So we have a wide degree of coverage, not to mention our employees here in Rock Island, Illinois, and then also Dallas, Texas, our second office. So again, we represent over 5,700 EB-5 investors. 4,800 of those investors have already received 526 petition approval. Over 1,400 have gone full cycle to already receive their permanent green card, and we've started returning capital back to over 1,500 EB-5 investors. These are huge numbers that we take a lot of pride in. It's not bragging, it's making sure that you understand, our experience, and anyone that you're looking at in EB-5, you need to be confident that these groups know what they're doing. And CMB, has had a lot of success driven by the success of our clients over the years. As I mentioned, we have representatives from around the world, over 50 staff members in-house in our Rock Island office and our Dallas office, and then stationed in various places around the world. As I mentioned, we speak over 14 languages and investors from 102 different countries. Likelihood is, if you're on this PowerPoint, or if you're on this webinar and you've logged in and you speak a little bit of English, but you'd be more comfortable communicating in your native language, the likelihood is we have somebody who speaks your language and can communicate with you in the language that you feel most comfortable with. So keep that in mind. Now, this is hugely important. And I always like to say this. I mentioned earlier, our success is driven by the success of our clients. And it's simple to us. If we reach and we can maintain the goals, if we can achieve the goals, I should say, our EB-5 investors, we know that we're going to have success. And what's your number one most important goal? Why is everyone on this webinar? If you're interested in EB-5, you're interested in a permanent green card. We put that goal above all else. We try and pick projects that we know will create the jobs, developers that are good stewards of that capital, that are going to build on time and on budget. And we use very conservative job creation models to reach that first goal. Second most important goal, and we keep hitting on it here, and COVID, I think, has amplified this issue, it's return of investment. And how do we try and ensure that? We try and ensure that by making sure the projects that we take on, number one, as I mentioned with the jobs, are risk mitigated. It's something we haven't touched on. EB-5 does require risk. There is no guarantee that you will receive your capital back or that you will receive your green card. The program itself requires risk, but the projects don't have to be risky. We can risk mitigate those by proper due diligence, ongoing compliance, having quality loan agreements, and in the very beginning, selecting quality borrowers that have track records of their own, that we can see have a history of building their projects, servicing and repaying their debt. Third most important goal, and this is something huge, third most important goal of any EB-5 investor should be that return on investment. Too many times I have EB-5 investors come to me and say, well, wait a minute, I could leave my money in a fixed deposit in my home country and earn, XYZ percent over a certain period of time. Why would I invest into your EB-5 project? For the green card. That's why you're investing in EB-5. EB-5 is atypical of a normal business investment in a lot of ways. There's this whole job creation component that changes the profile of what you're looking at and how you view EB-5. And so we've seen a lot of developers, a lot of aspiring regional centers that don't have a track history of their own, that don't have a track record of being able to achieve success for their clients, try and offer high rates of return to sway clients into moving forward with their projects. Let me ask you, if you've gone into an equity investment in an economy that's now impacted by a global pandemic, what do you think the likelihood is of you meeting and realizing the original returns that were promised by that developer? Probably not very good. the likelihood is that you're going to be equity if you're going to get a high rate of return. The likelihood is that, your equity is going to be shoved down by the interests of the lenders that are at a priority position in that capital structure. And so you may never see those returns. Also, if you're equity and you get forced out of the deal, you got to think about how does that impact your immigration pursuit. No investor should ever let return on investment be the guiding force and the deciding factor in the regional center that they select or the project that they select. Track record of the regional center in achieving the green card, making sure that that number one goal is met, is paramount. Now, I touched on this a second ago when we were talking with Mark. This is the loan model. CMB actually invented the loan model with our very first partnership all the way back in 1997. So CMB, we go out and we set up a limited partnership. That limited partnership starts to look at projects that would make for good EB-5 investments. We go out and we try and work with great borrowers. We do due diligence on their opportunities. We select those projects very carefully. We look at dozens and dozens of projects every year, yet we only take on a few. It's because we're trying to find projects that we think will meet all the criteria of the USCIS, will satisfy the immigration goals, or will satisfy the job creation requirements, and will be a good steward of the capital, will build on time and on budget, and will service and repay that debt. We then negotiate a loan with that borrower. It's not dissimilar from a bank. We do due diligence, we structure a loan with that borrower, we go through a whole term sheet phase and due diligence phase. Once we've completed that loan, we structure the limited partnerships offering materials and so on and so forth, marketing materials that you might see when you're considering that partnership that is going to explain the offering. We're taking that offering to the market. Prospective clients become investors in that partnership. So at that point in time, that's when you're investing that full $900,000 into the partnership. You become a limited partner in that partnership. And CMB, or a CMB affiliate, serves as the general partner of that partnership. And our role is to continue to be a fiduciary throughout the entire life cycle of your immigration pursuit and the life cycle of the loan. We're enforcing the terms and conditions of the loan, reporting information back to you that not only includes the economics of the project, but also includes all of the job creation that's taking place. We prepare a very nice filing template for you and your attorney. So at the point in time in which you're ready to move forward, all of the information is there for you and your attorney to submit your application to the USCIS. And on the back end, when you're ready to file your I-829 and have your conditions on your green card removed, we prepare a second template. And that one gives a final jobs report that shows all the job creation that took place. That information is nicely and neatly compiled in a template that, again, you and your immigration attorney file. So let's get into the partnership. CMB Group 78. Now, CMB Group 78 is one that we're extremely excited to introduce. It is what will be our 31st EB-5 investment partnership with one of our closest development partners or developer partners, Hillwood Development, a large company based out of Dallas, Texas. And this is going to involve the development and construction of 2 build-to-suit logistics facilities or fulfillment facilities for 2 Fortune 500 tenants. It's going to be in Southern California. You can see we're going to raise approximately $72.9 million or up to $72.9 million from 81 EB-5 investors. So this does qualify at the $900,000 level. Mark mentioned earlier, if it would have been outside of a TEA, it would require double that number, 1.8 million, but this one does easily qualify. So the developer, as I mentioned, this is a group that we are extremely proud to work with. They've been a huge part of CMB's growth over the years. As I mentioned, this is our 31st partnership with them. Hillwood is one of the largest real estate developers in the United States, and they are the development arm of the Perot family. The Perot family is a billionaire family based out of Dallas, Texas. Ross Perot Sr. is the patriarch of that family, passed away a couple of years ago, but got his start in IT. Actually, a very famous person in the United States, ran for president twice back in 1992 and 1996. His son, Ross Perot Jr., founded Hillwood all the way back in 1988 and is still the chairman of Hillwood. Hillwood has had a tremendous amount of success as a company, primarily in this space, industrial logistics development, master plan business parks, master plan residential communities. As I mentioned, huge track record of their own. They have experience in 59 different industrial markets, You can see 27 states and 6 different countries, and they have an international footprint. They have 7 offices in the United States and 3 offices outside of the United States, 3 international offices. Since 1988, they've developed over 192 million square feet of industrial logistics space. It's unbelievable what they've been able to do. And they work with some of the biggest tenants that are out there. You know, the Amazons, Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, FedEx, UPS, the list goes on and on. And they build these projects specific to the needs of those tenants in a lot of cases. Other times they're building them in markets that they know will absorb those buildings. This project, just to give you a little bit of additional information on Hillwood and CMB, this project, as I keep mentioning, is our 31st. Why do I keep mentioning that? It's because we've had a huge level of success. These clients, as Mark mentioned earlier, these project, as Mark mentioned earlier, they're very straightforward. They're very simple. They're very, the word that Mark used was vanilla, meaning they're not the most flashy projects in the world. They're going to build what they say they're going to build. They're going to do it on time and on budget. We can use a very conservative job creation model. They're going to use the capital the way they say they're going to use the capital, and they're going to repay the loan when they're supposed to repay the loan. So out of the 31 partnerships, 25 of them have already reached that I-924 or I-526 petition stage. So we have 25 partnerships with approvals at that stage. Represents, as you can see, over 1,200 clients that have already received 526 petition approvals and CMB partnerships that have served as lender to Hillwood projects. 5 of those partnerships, or 412 clients, have already received I-829s, and 14 of those partnerships have started repayment of their loans. So it's an unbelievable track record that we've been able to build in working with Hillwood. Show you a quick video on Hillwood as a company.
We are Hillwood, a forward-thinking real estate firm with a 30-year track record of industrial success. Every day, we combine our experience and depth of capital with the entrepreneurship of the Perot family. It results in a different kind of industrial real estate company, one that creatively adapts to change in order to deliver results for our customers, partners, and brokers. For 30 years, we've developed, acquired, and managed successful logistics projects in more than 30 markets. As an industry leader, we're on the forefront of what's next, incorporating innovative thinking into everything we build. But we do more than create the world's highest quality industrial projects. We create value where others won't. We deliver results over the long term. We develop opportunity every chance we get. That's the Hillwood way.
So it gives you a little bit of a flavor of what these projects will be. They're industrial logistics facilities. They're fulfillment centers for large companies that are booming right now in this growing e-commerce community. So the first project that we're going to take on with Group 78 is actually a little unique. It's tenant improvement work that is going to be built out at a project at a facility that has already been completed. So Hillwood completed this facility back in September of 2019. When they built it out, they built it as a speculative facility, meaning they knew that the market would absorb it, but they didn't have a tenant lease in place. Well, in November of last year, they signed a 10-year lease agreement with a tenant to come in and occupy that facility. But now they have work that needs to be completed in order to improve the project to meet the needs of that tenant. Now, it's a confidential tenant. It is a major Fortune 500 e-commerce retailer. What I would tell you is that if you move forward in wanting to do additional due diligence, if you sign a non-disclosure agreement with CMB, we can disclose the name of that tenant and certain information about the lease. The lease is fully executed, and we have no problem being able to talk about that during your due diligence on the offering. What are they going to do? They're going to do a lot of work to improve this to meet the needs of that tenant. They're going to demo some existing office space that was built out in the original facility. They're going to construct 32,000 square feet of additional pop-out office space and a 250,000 square foot mezzanine platform, as well as other utility improvements and infrastructure improvements to meet the needs of that tenant. Now, all of this work that's required to be completed is outlined in that lease agreement. And what's really unique about this opportunity is that Hillwood, as the builder, as the developer, or Hillwood Construction Services, is responsible for completing all of that build out before the tenant takes possession of the facility. So what's going to happen is the EB-5 funds will be used by Hillwood Construction Services to complete that build out. Under the terms of the lease agreement, this tenant is actually responsible for the full reimbursement of that work. And so effectively, what's collateralizing this loan and the exit strategy of this loan is the guarantee of the parent company that will be taking possession of that building to meet the terms and conditions of their lease agreement, which require that they reimburse Hillwood for all of this work prior to taking possession of the facility. So that work is all outlined in a guaranteed maximum price contract. The reimbursement for that work is outlined in the lease agreement. Both of those things can be made available for your due diligence with this offering, but it's a very simple, straightforward exit. In this case, we're actually not reliant on lease revenue to repay the loan. We're not reliant on the sale of the facility to repay the loan. It's even better. As they build as they build out the tenant improvements, as they satisfactorily complete them, Hillwood Construction Services gets to go for reimbursement underneath the lease contract. As that reimbursement comes through, it's used to repay the loan. So the second project that we'll take out is intended to be another build-to-suit distribution facility. This one is another confidential major Fortune 500 retailer. Same thing applies. If you sign that NDA, the likelihood is we'll be able to share some additional information on this tenant. I would tell you this tenant is still in negotiations to complete this lease. So the lease has not yet been signed. It's expected to be completed by September 1st. Terms of that are outlined in the loan agreement. And here's what CMB is going to do. It's unique. What we're going to do when we open this partnership and we start subscribing investors, we're only going to subscribe investors up to the amount of money that can be used in that first project, the Waterman TI project. And at the point in time in which this lease is actually signed and the conditions of the loan agreement have been met and Hillwood provides us the proper evidence and recommendation to move forward, we'll then commence additional fundraising. Now, it doesn't mean that some investors' money will go into one project or some will go into the other. What it means is that if they never take on this project, we'll simply cap our EB-5 raise. What does that mean? It means effectively, if you invest into this partnership, you're guaranteed that you're investing into a project or into a partnership whose money will be used for a pre-leased facility. I want you to think about that for a second, how important that is. If you're looking at a resort project or a luxury residential project or a hotel project, effectively what you're looking at is a speculative facility. They're going to build it, and there's no guarantee that people will ever come stay at that hotel. That hotel has to be on their game. They have to be marketing. They have to make sure that there's people traveling, they're hosting events or what have you to fill those rooms day in and day out. If the economy tanks and less people are traveling or less businesses are hosting events or things of that nature, well, so too will their occupancy. Their occupancy numbers will go down. It will impact it. What you have here is you have the opportunity to invest into a partnership that's making a loan to projects that are going to be pre-leased. Again, with this project, if the lease is never signed and the building never moves forward, we'll never raise funds that will be used for this project. If the lease is signed and the building moves forward, we'll expand our raise all the way up to the potential raise of 81 investors. And the investors who invest in the partnership will have an equal share of the collateral under both projects. So you'll be proportionally invested into two buildings that are fully pre-leased. So this is a big building, over 2 million square feet. And it actually takes CMB back to our roots a little bit. It's actually being built out at March Air Force Base. CMB, as some may know, but not a lot of people might know, it stands for California Military Base. And so we got our start doing infrastructure improvement projects on former military bases. In fact, both of these projects, the Waterman TI project and the VIP 215 project, are built on former Air Force bases that were part of CMB's original designation all the way back in the 1990s. So the first one taking place at the former Norton Air Force Base, this one at the March Air Force Base. Now, March wasn't closed, it was realigned, and now the March Joint Powers Authority is actually responsible for reusing or using the land that once made up part of the Air Force Base. And so this is a true public-private partnership. Hillwood will be entering into a long-term ground lease to control the land with the March Joint Powers Authority. And then we'll sign a lease agreement with this major tenant. And it's anticipated right now to be a 20-year lease agreement We expect to see that lease finalized this quarter. So I didn't mention it on the last one, but the last project is under construction. So the Waterman TI sub-project is already under construction. It started in the first quarter, and so it's ongoing. We can show ample evidence of that construction ongoing. This project, as soon as they get the lease signed, will start its construction activity in the third quarter of 2020, is anticipated to be completed, you can see, by the end of 2021. Exit strategy for this one is also pretty simple. They're going to have a long-term tenant lease in place if we take this project on. So what will happen is they'll complete the project. There'll be a short lease stabilization period, and they'll look to sell this building to a long-term holder like a real estate investment trust or a retirement fund that will ultimately allow the sale of the project to generate enough revenue to repay the EB-5 loan. As I mentioned, project location, both in Southern California, both in a hot logistics market, the Inland Empire submarket. So what's really important is that this has been a true hub for logistics growth in the United States. As e-commerce has grown, especially through COVID, people locked in their homes, people trying to get their basic goods and services through online options and delivery options rather than going out to the stores, we've seen this huge growth in e-commerce. Well, this Inland Empire hub has close proximity to the two largest ports in the Western Pacific, Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach, and serves as a great entry point to the Western United States. Another important thing to note, that Waterman TI project, located at the former Norton Air Force Base, is now home to the San Bernardino International Airport. It's already got air cargo transportation services provided from FedEx and UPS, and it's anticipated that next year, Amazon will start its operations as a air cargo carrier operating out of the San Bernardino International Airport. It's publicly available information that you can see if you Google that. It's really fascinating, the expansive growth and the explosion of growth that Amazon has seen over the last several years. So as I mentioned earlier, both of these projects are located in TEAs, meaning they qualify for that reduced investment threshold. This can't be left unsaid. We've been looking at these projects for a while. We've known that these projects will qualify in just 2 census tracts. They're very simple, straightforward models. We'll have a full analysis of these TEAs provided in the I-526 petition filing template. It's also available for, excuse me, your due diligence at the point in time in which you're reviewing the partnership for your potential investment. Capital structure of this project is straightforward. To build out both projects will cost about $244.7 million. 23% of this capital is going to come from developer equity. 30% of it will come from the EB-5 loan, and 47% will come from senior debt. So it's a well-balanced project, not a overly aggressive slice of the capital structure. I should rephrase. We won't have an overly aggressive slice of the capital structure coming from EB-5. There's going to be ample job creation. Another important point, we talked about this earlier. What happens if the EB-5 raise is delayed or falls short? Well, there are certain provisions that could allow for a developer to put in additional debt and subordinate the interests of the EB-5 investors. We have a mechanism that helps prevent that in this situation. So Hillwood, as a company, is going to use other available equity to bridge these projects. So they're going to essentially overfund these projects with other available equity. And at the point in time in which EB-5 is raised, it will back down Hillwood's equity to the values that we just discussed on the capital structure page. So what does this mean? Well, if the EB-5 raise falls short or has some sort of delay, these projects need to keep moving forward. Hillwood's going to make sure that these projects keep moving forward. They have long-term leases, or they will have long-term leases in place. They have, a track record of their own to continue to maintain. The other thing is that part of the terms and conditions of our loan agreement, they've provided us a completion guarantee, or we'll leverage the completion guarantee of the senior lender that's in place. And so they have a requirement to build these out. And they're going to do that with other available equity. So if we raise capital again, it will back down Hillwood equity. If we can't raise that EB-5 capital, the projects will continue to move forward, which means job creation takes place. And at the end of the day, any EB-5 money that is funded is going to be collateralized by a tangible asset with a long-term lease in place. From a job creation perspective, as I mentioned, we have a conservative slice of the project, so a 63% job creation buffer. It's a huge job creation buffer. The other thing I mentioned, if we start funding this project, the portion of the funding that will go into the Waterman TI sub-project could be capped if the lease is never signed for VIP 215. At this point, we're only anticipating raising up to 44 investors for the Waterman TI sub-project. So if we have to cap it, there's still ample job creation from that project alone. We won't exceed a raise that can't be supported by the job creation from that particular project. Just to quickly recap, look, Group 78 will be developed and constructed as build-to-suit or pre-leased facilities. So this is a huge attribute, something that helps de-risk or risk mitigate these projects substantially, in that the likelihood is that these projects will be built, they will be leased by long-term tenants, and it will allow for repayment of that loan. So again, these tenants are supposed to be, or anticipated to be, major Fortune 500 companies. We can share information on those tenants after you've completed a non-disclosure agreement. So CMB and Hillwood, again, have an unbelievable track record in working together. Over 30, this is their 31st partnership that we'll be taking on. And we've been able to have success at all stages. And as you can see, over 1,600 individual investors. So over 1,600 families have actually placed their trust in CMB partnerships, serving as lender to Hillwood projects. And so, again, when we structure these, we put the goals of the investors first and foremost. And frankly, that's why they're successful. We're looking at job creation, green card, safety and security of the capital, repayment of the EB-5 loans, return of capital to the investors. And that's what makes these projects a fantastic opportunity. So I hope you will take the opportunity to engage with CMB staff and get more information on these projects. And if need be, I'd love to sit with you and talk with you in greater detail at a later time to answer any questions that you might have on the projects. That's Group 78. We can turn it back over for some additional questions. So Andrew, take it away.
Sounds good. Thanks, Matt. We have actually had a very active Q&A session today, so we have quite a few to go through. We'll do our best to get through what we have available. So there was one that you can speak on here. How often is the TEA assessed by the government, and what would happen if that TEA changes at a later date?
So great question. So the TEA is something that's analyzed by CMB in advance of any investor investing into the partnership. Now, the USCIS lays out criteria that have to be followed when looking at TEAs. And so what we do is, to the letter of the law, we follow the criteria that have been outlined. And I mentioned before, CMB is conservative when it comes to this. We've never cheated the TEAs, which is why we had projects like our Group 69 project that's been recently closed out, and our Group 74 project that should be closed out in the next couple of weeks, that we're able to straddle old regs and new regs. They've been structured conservatively. So what happens is we're looking at unemployment data from the previous year. And that's how it's laid out. We're looking at last year's total unemployment data that's published by the various census bureaus. And we're looking at that data on a census tract level. And then we're comparing it to the appropriate year total, or the one-to-one average of unemployment for that same calendar year. So the unemployment data lags about a year. That data comes out end of April, early May, typically. So the data that we're using is the most recently available data that just came out end of April, early May. And what will happen is if we haven't finished subscribing the investment partnership in full, we'll again have to look at that data in late April, early May of next year to again make sure that we're looking at the most relevant and most recent data. I think we've had a lot of questions on this because people have said, well, wait a minute, that unemployment rate is now skyrocketing. Is that going to cause some sort of issue with the TEA and whether or not the TEA will be in good standing? Well, it will impact it probably eventually, but we'll be looking at that information when new year total data is published in late April or early May of next year. Now, something important to add, CMB actually has 3 in-house economists. Mark, I don't know if you've seen that with any other regional center, but we, as far as I'm aware, are one of the only regional centers that have our own in-house economists And we've had those in-house economists for the better part of 10 years in working on CMB projects, looking at information like unemployment data, job creation data. And so they have a huge knowledge base on how this is done and a lot of experience in doing this to meet the criteria of the USCIS.
I mean, I think that there are other regional centers who have economists, and I think it's one of the really things that people need to look at is a regional center properly equipped to represent my interests both as a regional center and as an asset manager, right? In both those categories. And in my mind, there's a very, very small number of regional centers who really have the staff to do that. The way you check that is, bluntly, you physically go to the regional center's headquarters, right? You talk to the people. Any quality regional center will invite you to do that. Some of them, you'll turn up and you'll see it's an executive suite. You know, maybe they have 2 full-time salespeople and that's it. They really don't have any support. I've been to Matt's headquarters, I don't know how many times, but certainly more than once. They now have them in Dallas and in where's your headquarters?
Rock Island. It's a small town, but their headquarters are biggest office.
I have a huge, like, sort of warehouse of economists and people who are making sure that the money is properly dispersed, the borrower requests. Another really important one, right, that people have really been tripped up on is regional centers who don't make sure that borrower requests are proper and that funds are being properly dispersed and protected in the escrow accounts. That's a very common failing. Now, Matt's isn't the only regional center, but I would say it's one of very few regional centers who have a team who really know what they're doing with that. It's real estate asset management role. People can say, oh, EB-5, it's different. Nonsense. Every real estate asset manager in the United States does that work. And if you do the work of policing or managing an EB-5, real estate backed project escrow account, you're doing what an asset manager does and has been doing for very many years. So you want to know, does the regional center really have the experience to do that? The economists, right? Do they really have economists who understand the models? Because that can get pretty critical. That can get pretty critical. You know, if a project's going fine and there's no issues that come up, you know, things can be smooth sailing. But as soon as there's an issue, that's where you know, the proper due diligence comes in, and having a team who can really step in and sort of sort through and sort out the problems. I think that's where it really pays off. And, you know, I don't think it's true to say Matt's regional center is the only one, but it's one of very, very few regional centers who really have the right cast of characters with the expertise to do that.
That's right.
Thanks, guys. This has come up a couple of different times, and if there is a new president, or also because of COVID, what is the likelihood of the amount going back down for EB-5 and the investment?
So I'll take that, right? I mean, this question comes up all the time. It came up initially because President Trump tweeted something or said something about when COVID sort of, you know, was getting going, about doing that in EB-5. He got shut down by other politicians so fast, it was sort of unbelievable. And it was just completely non-viable. So I would say that it's almost inconceivable that that's going to happen. Now, almost inconceivable doesn't mean impossible, because anyone who tells you it's impossible is an idiot or a liar, because we really don't know, right? Some extreme set of circumstances that's not really foreseeable could come up, and maybe. But I don't know of any serious commentator that thinks that. Matt, I know you guys are very, very involved with IIUSA. IIUSA, for those who don't know, is the industry association for regional centers. They have a lobbying arm. They would know. Matt, what do you see with that?
Yeah, so Pat Hogan, our CEO, is the longest serving board member of IIUSA, and he stays very involved in the conversation centering around, you know, change to the program in various ways. And so one of the things I would tell you is that when EB-5 was going through the last several years of, you know, uncertainty on what would change in the program, the one thing that never seemed to be up for debate was whether or not the price should go up. Everyone kind of unanimously agreed that the price should go up. And my personal opinion is that, and again, anything could happen. As Mark said, I would never say this is 100% certainty. But my personal opinion is I don't think you're ever going to see that price go down. Because when you look at the other major countries around the world that have immigration by investment programs, the United States, the EB-5 program is still one of the cheaper programs when you compare it to the Australian program or the UK program or what have you that have been popular and are kind of in countries similar to the United States. And so, I don't think that there's ever going to be an appetite by the lawmakers to allow that price to go down. I also don't see there being any merit in the potential for economic conditions or, the COVID-19 environment to cause, some sort of, sale on EB-5 where it's now discounted and you get to make that investment for some cheaper value over a very short period of time. I don't envision that ever taking place.
Thank you. All right. So how does the presidential executive order impact green card issuance for dependents of primary applicants that are now applying?
Well, Mark, I'm not sure what experience you would have seen in this, but I'm not aware that the executive order is going to impact green card issuance for dependents as it pertains to EB-5.
I think, what Matt is saying is correct, right? It doesn't really affect them. But one thing just to truthfully bear in mind is EB-5 is exempted from the immigrant visa ban, but many consulates, some of them are starting to open right now for immigrant visas. So some consulates are starting to open, but many consulates remain closed. So you can say that an immigrant visa is not part of the ban, but it doesn't make any difference if the consulate's closed. Now, sometimes you can get around that. So we had clients in Cairo who, US Consulate Cairo keeps closing for security reasons. And then we found that some other consulates were willing to take those cases who were not closed. So in a COVID environment, as some consulates start to open, most likely they're going to refer you back to the proper consulate where you're resident and where they have your case. But it doesn't hurt to ask another consulate if they're willing to transfer the file over. As I said, most likely the answer is going to be no, but doesn't hurt to ask. So that's what I'd say about that.
Thank you. We've had a couple of questions that revolve around H-1B. There's one here that says, I'm currently on H-1B and in the US, and if I file my I-526, when in the timeline that Mark had showed us, can I quit my job and rely on EB-5 to stay in the US?
Sorry, can you repeat that question, Andrew? I apologize.
Yeah, certainly. So the question states that I am currently on H-1B in the United States, and if I file my I-526, when in the timeline that you had showed, Mark, in your presentation, can they quit their job to rely on the EB-5 to stay in the United States?
So, I would not recommend quitting a job until you have got an I-526 approval. You have filed, if you're in the United States, you have filed an adjustment of status. When you file for adjustment of status, depending what country you're from, right, you have the ability to file for an EAD, a work permit. I would not quit my job till I had the work permit approval. That can happen quite quickly. Again, sort of caveats potentially for people from different countries, but the process is, if you're in H-1B in America, you do EB-5, you get the I-526 approval, which, as we've talked about, is increasingly quickly. No one can guarantee how long the I-526 is going to take. No one can. But it is possible to say that unless you're Chinese or perhaps those adjudication times are getting faster. Once you have the I-526 adjudicated, you can then file for adjustment of status if you're in the United States. When you file for an adjustment of status, you can file for an EAD. It used to be that the US government said that those would, or there used to be a rule for those taking 90 days. They now can take longer than 90 days, but generally they come through quite quickly.
Thank you. Good information.
Anything to add, Matt?
No, I think that makes sense to me.
So Matt, I've got one here, and it says, what is your company doing during COVID-19 to help protect its investors?
So it's a combination of all the things that I had just mentioned. So it's two things, right? When we're talking about existing investors, we're talking about ongoing due diligence, ongoing compliance measures to make sure that we understand what's happening with all of these projects. So as I mentioned back in March, when we started to see COVID really start to impact the United States, we started sending out messages to every single one of our borrowers. Tell us what's happening, remain in contact with us, reminding them almost, I don't want to say that we immediately create an adversarial relationship with any of our borrowers, because it's important to be a steward for the partnership and to make sure that we have a responsible relationship with our borrowers. But sometimes it's important to remind them of their responsibilities under the loan agreement. And so what we did in March is we sent out immediate notice to say, remember, you're responsible for outlining any material adverse impacts of COVID-19 on the project and whether or not it's going to impact our collateral or jeopardize your ability to service or repay its debt. So that was the first step. The second steps have been working with our borrowers and understanding the challenges that they're facing, trying to provide lenience when we can, but also maintaining our position in areas where we need to maintain our position. So these are all important things that any fiduciary would be doing, or any lender would be doing with any borrower. So maintaining proper contact with those projects. We've done site visits. We've been on site at certain projects. We've requested additional due diligence information, additional reporting information that even goes outside the bounds of what's required under our loan agreement. And these are all things that I think any lender should be asking any borrower, not even just in an EB-5 perspective. We would envision that any bank across the United States would be asking any borrower these similar types of questions. And so it's maintaining our responsibility to complete due diligence and to be a good steward for those partnerships. That's something that's been huge that we've been doing for our existing LPs. For new LPs, for prospective clients, it's a whole different ballgame. What it has been is it's been looking at opportunities for those investors that would protect them from undue risk that could be coming out of this that is not yet known. So are we going to run out to the market with a hospitality project or a resort or a luxury condominium or a timeshare or something that is going to be only in demand in an area that is going to be subject to travel? If I'm taking on a timeshare in Florida or a big resort somewhere that's going to, that's going to be reliant upon, travel and movement and traveler confidence in the economy and all of those sorts of things, I think I'd be a little worried about those types of projects right this second, because no one really knows what the future will hold. So for our existing projects and for prospective clients, what we're trying to do is give them the opportunity to invest into something that can be as risk mitigated as possible. And with our Group 78 partnership, give them an opportunity that's in an industry sector that is in fact thriving in the COVID environment, and that's e-commerce. And give them the opportunity to be a part of that rather than stomach the realities that are facing certain other asset types.
Thanks, Matt. I've got another question here. It says, I'm having an I-526 petition pending for adjudication and currently in the United States for F1. Once the I-526 is approved, adjustment of status or flying back to Vietnam for the consular interview, which way is faster to get the green card?
So I think, Matt, Andrew, I didn't quite hear. Let me repeat what I think the question is. I think the client is saying they're from Vietnam, they're currently in the United States. Should they do adjustment of status, or should they come back to Vietnam for a consular interview?
Correct. Yes. Which way is faster to get the green card?
I'll invite Matt's comment because he sees a lot of cases, but I would think that you'd be very silly to leave the United States right now and come back to I'm in Hanoi right now, to come back to Vietnam for a consular interview. There are all kinds of issues that may come up right now in the current environment. Adjustment of status is relatively straightforward. Here's a really big thing to consider. When you get a green card, you need to think about what is a green card. A green card really, for most people, is the right to travel in and out of the United States and to work in the United States. That's what people want from a green card. They don't really want a green card. They want the right to travel in and out of the United States and work in the United States. When you file adjustment of status, you can also file certain circumstances with Vietnamese people and Indians, but generally you can file for an EAD, work authorization, and for a travel permit. I call those two things together in synthetic green card, because you don't have a green card when you have those two things, but you have effectively the same major rights as the green card holder, being the right to work in the United States and the right to travel in another country. As I said before, it used to be that those came through in about 90 days. It's gotten a little bit longer right now, but you certainly don't have to wait the full I-485, which is the adjustment of status form, adjudication period to benefit from those rights. Do you have any comments, Matt?
No, I would tend to agree with everything you said, Mark. And there are other challenges with leaving the United States right now. Part of the reason why we're not traveling and why we're doing webinars like this is the health risk of traveling and being around other travelers. That goes without saying. But then it's also restrictions that we're seeing from other countries on entry from the U.S. and then the likelihood that you'll be able to get back to the U.S. just with normal course of travel. And so I think that also impacts certain decision making there as well. But I agree.
Thank you both. So we've got an additional question here, and it's revolving around student visa. So as I understand, if my son needs to go as a student visa next year, I can't proceed with EB-5 as it's going to take a minimum of 30 months to be able to get to the United States. So essentially, I think what they're asking is if their son needs to go to the U.S. on a student visa, should they not proceed, or should they proceed with EB-5? And I guess what that would be.
First of all, the fact that you are filing or not filing an EB-5 doesn't stop you going to the United States on a student visa. A question that comes up many, many times is there some kind of conflict between a student visa and an EB-5? The answer is there are some technical things that you need to bear in mind. But, Matt, I don't know how many hundreds of clients you've had do that, but we've certainly had a very large number of clients go to America on a student visa and simultaneously either file for an EB-5 after they've entered the United States on an EB-5, on a student visa, or file before they go to the United States on a student visa. There's never been a problem. Every single case has been approved. No refusals, no denials. Have you seen any problems with that, Matt?
No, I haven't personally, and I think it's very common. I mean, you look at it kind of plays into the purpose of EB-5 and how certain investors like to be able to use EB-5, but then also understanding the timelines associated to it. So you might have situations where someone doesn't learn about the opportunity for EB-5 until a point in time in which their son or daughter is ready to go away to college. And there's, frankly, from what I've seen, not much of an issue in being able to pursue that student visa to study in the United States while the EB-5 petition is pending. And then when you look at the long-term intent, obviously, of the EB-5 visa is to immigrate to the United States. And I don't think that necessarily comes in conflict with the short-term intent of the F-1 visa.
All right, thank you both. We are just about done with our Q&A as we're going to be wrapping up our event. We may have time for maybe one more question here. Let's see. What would happen if a couple of years down the road, the investment project fails, runs out of funds, or a different scenario? Would my application be jeopardized along with the monies invested?
So
that's a great question.
The answer is potentially, right? The first important distinction to make is we're assuming everyone's talking about regional center EB-5, right? Now, there are two kinds of EB-5. There's direct EB-5 and regional center EB-5. direct EB-5 just means any EB-5 that isn't a regional center case. Sometimes people misquote it as it's my own investment. A lot of times it is, but it's really any regional center, any EB-5 qualifying investment that's not through a regional center. If you apply through a regional, not through a regional center, you have a bigger problem with project failures, because you have to create and maintain actual jobs, 10 actual employees. So in other words, before you hit your I-829, if the business goes bankrupt and you don't have the number of employees anymore, you won't get your I-829, your green card's at risk. If sort of conversely, a different scenario, and this has come up, perhaps your business isn't doing so well, and you think, oh, I can be clever. I can maintain these jobs and I'm just going to pay the people even though I don't really need them. USCIS will likely deny the case. They've got quite good at this, and they look at seeing, are the jobs really needed? So for direct, yes, there's a significant risk. Now, in the world of regional centers, and this hits another question I was just answering too, so I'll broaden the answer a little bit so I can hit another question, is in the world of regional centers, they use economic models. And to simplify things, so I'm going to make it slightly an inaccurate answer, but I think it's helpful to simplify things. Essentially, regional centers use EB-5 models, so they don't really have to create any jobs. It's about spending money. So the way this model works is it requires you to spend money. As long as you spend money on the right things, jobs are deemed to be created. So there aren't any real people working. Money is spent correctly, jobs are deemed to be created. This becomes relevant to failed projects and getting your green card. If it's a direct case, as I said, and the project fails before you filed the I-829, you've got a significant problem because you're not going to have maintained the jobs and not created. If you're a regional center and you're following an economic model and the money's been spent in the right way, then your green card should be protected. However, one of the key things we talked about with regional centers is proper due diligence and making sure that the regional center has the protections in place to make sure that the money is correctly spent and drawn down correctly. Because I'm afraid there are regional centers out there who have failed in their obligation to do that. There's one big example of a failure like this. I won't say who it was, but basically the regional center failed to make sure that the money was spent within a TEA and was spent upon what it was supposed to be spent on per the business plan. Result, USCIS denied every single case in those projects. Completely unnecessary if an investor had done the right due diligence to make sure that the regional center had the correct protections in place to make sure the money's spent right. Trouble is, an immigration lawyer will say, that's not my job. I don't do that. I think that's malpractice and gross incompetence, but that's what immigration lawyers do. They'll tell you it's not my job. I don't care about that issue. That's a legal issue for an asset manager and how they police that and the sort of controls in place. They just look at up front to say, if the money's spent as they say it's going to be spent, will you get a green card? So I think a critical part of due diligence is making sure that the regional center has the right protections in place to make sure that happens properly, because if it does, because of the way regional centers work, you're really not running that much risk with your green card in a failed project. Do you have comments, Matt, or how do you guys?
I have a lot, and Mark, you did a great job kind of explaining this, and so I'm going to cover a little bit of what you had talked about, but we get this question a lot. It's one of the most commonly asked questions. What's my worst case scenario? And then what if, the project runs out of money? What if, the developer goes bankrupt? What if construction stalls? There are a number of different ways in which you can either have success or you can fail in an EB-5 pursuit. So it goes back to my goals I talked about. What's your number one most important goal? Well, it's the green card. So are there ways in which the project can completely deteriorate financially and leave you not getting your capital back, but still get a green card? Yes, you can have a project that is a conservative job creation model that is built, the money is spent, as Mark said, the various multipliers support that all the job creation took place, but then you can have a regional center that's totally remiss in their responsibilities, or a regional center that did everything they were supposed to do, and yet the project still deteriorated financially. Could be an economic event, could be operational, could be that they, just completely mismanaged the project from day one, or as Mark mentioned, that the project was doomed to fail because it wasn't properly structured in the very beginning. So you can have a situation where the project gets built, job creation takes place, you get your green card, but you never see your money back. On the other side of that equation, you can have a situation where the project gets built, it's a booming success, but they were so over aggressive on their job creation modeling that they were never going to hit the job creation goals of the EB-5 investors. When you think back to what we were talking about with our most recent partnership, CMB Group 78, the job creation model in that project is only reliant upon indirect and induced jobs that result from spending. So if that money is spent to complete that project, all the job creation will be there. We're actually not counting on-site construction workers or any of the people who will be working inside the logistics center at the point in time in which the tenant takes possession. Sometimes those can equate to hundreds or thousands of jobs. I think back to a project that we did in 2012, our Group 8 partnership. We developed a fulfillment center also in San Bernardino for Amazon. It was a Hillwood project. Amazon ended up being the tenant. They hired, shortly after completing that building, 2,000 employees to operate within that facility. We actually didn't count any of those 2,000 jobs, any of those 2,000 employees. We only looked at indirect and induced job creation that came out as a result of the spending. You have certain regional centers that will count the indirect and induced from spending, the on-site construction workers, and the workers that are going to be operating the facility once it's complete, so jobs from operations. And what they'll do is they'll then leverage all of that job creation to make a much larger EB-5 loan, and that might serve as senior construction debt or a just much larger portion of the equity needed to complete the project. And sometimes to those guys, it looks good on paper because it might be cheaper capital. But what it does is it puts the EB-5 investor in a position of risk. Because what if you build that building? The building is a great success, but you fell short on the operations, meaning, in order to achieve its great, financial numbers and hit its performance, they had to cut labor, they had to cut staff. Or let's say they had to reduce the overall budget by a little bit to, get rid of a portion of the project that they thought was not going to net out from a profitability standpoint. If they had to jeopardize any of those job creation criteria, you could have a situation where the project itself is financially viable. It can service the debt, it can repay the debt, but when they go to count the job creation at the end of the day, you didn't create all the jobs, and certain investors end up getting denials at their I-829 petition and sent home. And then of course there's a third way. There's a third way in which there's a total failure, meaning there's no proper due diligence, the project was doomed from the beginning, they were gonna misappropriate the funds, it could be a fraud, it could just be, a bad developer that didn't know what they were doing. They used bad job creation models. They used, they didn't have their entitlements completed, so the project stalled out for some reason. Maybe it was that they went to the market before it was fully capitalized, and then a major component of the funding backed out of the project, leaving the project incomplete. There's also a very major case out there that's very easily available and easy to find, whereby you had an established regional center that went out to take on a project that wasn't fully capitalized. And they probably structured a good offering. They probably had all the best intentions, but a portion of the capital backed out. And there's certainly going to be concern there as to whether or not the job creation components will be met. And there's definitely going to be concern there as to whether or not the investors will ever see their capital back. In that situation, and in situations where you have a total devastation, you might have a situation where the developer has spent all the EB-5 capital, but then the project stalls out. There's no value in the asset, job creation can't be met. And so it's a total loss of green card, loss of capital. So those are the ways that we always talk about. What we try and do is use those conservative job creation models. We belt and suspender those. We had added protections to make sure that there's completion guarantees, that the developer has a proven track history, and that we make sure that all the capital is in place to complete that project. So there's very little chance that that spending won't take place and that job creation won't take place. And then from an upfront due diligence standpoint, we know that if those things take place, if the project gets built, there's a tangible asset there, we can understand what the value of that asset is going to be. We can stress test, we can apply different models to try and determine, what could happen from a market standpoint that could impact the value of that asset. just like any lender would do, and try and determine, look, once this thing gets built, are we going to meet the jobs? Yep. Okay. Is it likely that it's going to be valuable and that there's going to be ability to service and repay debt? Yep. Okay. Those are the basic tests that we're going to look at with every project. So there's ways to avoid them, but obviously there's multiple ways that can fail if those things are not taken seriously.
Now, a follow-up question, right? I just got like email personally is, when I talked about adjustment of status, I sort of rushed over the discussion of Vietnam and China as they're sort of different. There's this whole complicated thing about the Department of State's monthly visa bulletin and Table A and Table B. And if you're current on Table B, filing for adjustment of status. This is currently relevant for applicants from Vietnam and China. India's moved current. Vietnam is moving current on Table B. However, if you're from Vietnam, there are some other things you want to bear in mind. I wanted to avoid giving a generic answer that also includes Vietnam, because it may be accurate right now, and I've heard other law firms give that answer, but USCIS policies can change. So rather than give a generic answer, what I'd rather do, if you're a Vietnamese person, is email me or call me, and we'll give you an individual consultation and explain in great detail why right now it might be okay, but things that you need to bear in mind, and it's just dishonest not to disclose how that process works in more detail. But it's not relevant for anyone else unless you're really Vietnamese or Chinese right now. Sorry, Matt.
Guys, this is, we invited Mark because Mark is a qualified attorney in his own right. His firm provides a lot of services, EB-5 and other unrelated. And, we don't require that you work with any one individual attorney. We require that you work with the attorney that you're most comfortable with. We've had a lot of clients move forward that have worked with Mark, and he's done a great job for those clients. And, I think the advice that he provides is sound. So, Mark, I want to thank you for joining us here today. I think we're past our time to wrap this up. So, Andrew, do you have any additional comments that you want to add?
No, thank you both. It's been very valuable, and I hope that all of our attendees have felt the same. For those that still had questions that we weren't able to get to today, please email us, info@cmbeb5visa.com. We would be happy to try to address any of the questions that we weren't able to cover in Q&A today. A sincere thank you from all of us for sharing your time and staying throughout this entire presentation. Most of you were able to stay with us this entire time, and thank you for that. Again, we hope you found this to be a valuable resource while considering and planning to move to the United States. Feel free to use the contact information, info@CMB EB-5 if you had any other questions that we could cover for you. We will be sending out a video link and an email to follow up to all of those who've registered here in the next day or two. Be looking for that in your inbox. And again, thank you. We look forward to seeing you all stateside, hopefully.
One more closing thought. When you look for a regional center, you want to work with somebody who's going to be an advocate for you. Not only will we be an advocate for you, but when you reach out to CMB, we're going to assign you to a very specific case manager here at CMB, a professional who has years of experience in working with investors, likely from the market in which you come from, who might be able to speak the same language as you, or is going to understand kind of the challenges that you might face. And so you'll obviously have access to people like Andrew or myself or other team members, but you're going to have a person who's with you and an advocate who's with you along this entire process, because it can be a long process. And so you need to know that that's not available from every regional center, but it's something that we're very happy to be able to provide to any client that chooses to move forward with CMB. So I look forward to the opportunity to speak with any one of you in the future.